We're officially live. Podcast
Awesome.
time. Although I'm going to cut this part out because it's dumb.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe I'll leave it in.
No, leave it in. Get the extra couple minutes out of it, right?
Anyways, welcome back to the Euroforce Podcast, episode 5. We've got back to the more traditional forest topics. We're going to talk about wildfire today. By wildfire, I mean forest fires. I got my buddy Colin Paranich on today. He is a registered forestry professional in the province of Alberta. We met in university, and we both did Hell Attack for 3 summers. I did 3 summers. What did you do?
Yeah, 3 summers.
Yeah. So we got a little bit of experience fighting fire, and so kind of what goes into that. And then also with our forestry background, I feel like we're kind of, we got a little bit to say about fire. We can discuss the general properties of it. I don't think we're professionals in any way about it, but we can talk to the public about it. Anyways, so let's get right into it. So basically the importance of fire. Just talking about fire in the land base, right? So talk about basically how the boreal forest, it's all basically rejuvenated by fire and fire activity. That's the gist of it, the simple of it. Pine trees especially, their cones have a resin that keeps them all together really, really tight. And although they do open up with direct sunlight, really, really intense sunlight, a lot of times the fire will force all of them to open up and create this massive explosion of new pine trees after a fire. So the resin actually, the fire heats up the resin, opens up the cones, allows all the seeds to fall out. So that's needed on the landscape to allow pine to come back. As foresters, we actually do scarification, which is supposed to be replicating that process. So all the pine cones that are on the ground are actually, they have this machine that drags a bunch of stuff behind another machine, and it basically just like tears up the ground and stirs up all the cones and kind of breaks them open so that the seeds come out, and that's supposed to be replicating fire activity, right? Fire, it's super important. Need it on the land base. So it's not just this big scary thing that's causing all these problems, burning down towns. Although like even my hometown where I grew up was actually one of the first to burn down in the province. It's kind of weird, but
yeah. People think of fire as being that big destructive force on the landscape and causing millions and millions of dollars in insurance damage and homes and livelihoods destroyed. But you forget to bring it back down to its base purpose, and that's to have ecosystem turnover and new growth and restart succession over again.
So succession just meaning new growth, getting the forest back to square one where it can start over with different species, and basically just increasing biodiversity and changing the landscape over, right? So it's a really important feature, and I think a lot of people it is kind of it's kind of glorified in a bad way in the media, I guess, right? Because the only media it gets is bad media, right? It's just BCs are being evacuated and towns are being evacuated, people are losing their homes and stuff, and that's horrible. Like I have family members myself who lost their home in the Slave Lake fire. I know lots of people who lost places in Fort Mac. And it's horrible. Obviously, being displaced like that, losing all of your things, it's brutal. And we can get into that a little later, but that's a result of some management practices as well as climate change and some other things. But we'll get into that a little bit later. So as far as the basics of fire, it's always been here, right? It's evolved with the forest. Like it's part of the forest. It's always been there way before we were, right? When the earth was created, the whole thing was on fire, right? And that just continued.
Yeah.
So, the fire, it helps with nutrient recycling, especially is a really big one. So a big fire comes through, burns out all the forest material, all the vegetation, right? And although you lose habitat and you lose all that old growth and all that stuff, you're getting a quick breakdown of that fiber, that wood fiber and that vegetation fiber into ashes, which goes back into the soil and replenishes that soil on a giant scale. Like, I mean, you think about like one tree going down in the bush because of a pathogen or something like that, or insects, right? And you get, you got a little bit of like nutrient recycling going on there, going back into the soil from the trees. But if you have a fire going through, although a lot of that carbon is being burnt off, a lot of that fiber is going right back into the soil at a massive scale. So you've got a crazy rich soil all of a sudden all over again, right?
And that's how these species evolved. Like like you were mentioning before with the pine tree, that's a fire species that evolves over time.
Yeah.
To live with fire and to be able to reproduce very effectively.
Yeah.
Post fire.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, it's it's always been there. It's super important for the fire, for forest ecosystems and nutrient replenishment and new growth. So a big one for new growth, like I've been saying in the past, similar to cut blocks, and that it creates a situation in which browsers like moose and deer, all of a sudden they've got all this new growth coming up that they can feed on, and they're not looking for stuff to eat in the wintertime when they got to dig through 4 feet of snow to try and find grass that's dry and cured and shitty old grass that nobody wants to eat. Who wants to eat hay when you can get yourself a nice big chunky bud on the top of an aspen tree? Chunky buds. So anyways, so that's kind of some of the importance of fire in the landscape. It's not just this big scary thing. It's not like Bambi, Bambi's mom died or whatever it was, or
I've listened to a couple of your old podcasts and keep coming back to the Bambi.
I don't know, man. I got nothing to say.
But that's the one thing is, it's hard to see that fire in a positive light. So you have to kind of paint it with that positive light. And
yeah, for sure. It's you have to point out to people that it's, although we want to suppress it, we also want to let it go in places where we need to let it go. So that kind of ties into the whole suppression thing, I guess, and where problems arise. Like, people look into places like BC and Alberta, and we're seeing all these giant, northern Saskatchewan even, and we're seeing all these crazy huge fires that are just seem to be blown out of proportion, and they're like destroying homes and they're destroying communities, and it just seems to be so like apocalyptic in relation to...
that's the trend we're getting to now, is we're getting to live in a time where these massive fire events are going to be happening more and more often. They're going to be bigger. We have older forests now. We have a lot more fuel on the landscape, so we have to learn how to live with them.
Yeah. Not
only just how to use it, but how to live with it, how to manage it, how to mitigate wildfire on that landscape, especially with you have these multi-users on the landscape.
Yeah. No, for sure. It's a huge thing, because I mean, I don't know exactly when we started suppressing fire on a huge scale, but I think it was in the 50s somewhere roughly. That's when we kind of started keeping track of forest fires, is in the 50s. That's when we have records of them and how big they were, kind of the general outline of where they took place, right? And we can see that the intensity of fires has gone up. So if you look at the history of forest fires in the past, a lot of times forest fires, it's not like you see on the news. It's not like every time a forest fire starts, it's this big giant thing that's blown through the canopy and burning out the whole forest and leaving nothing left, right? It's most of the time, most forest fires, I think I read the stats the other day, I think 95% of the forest fires in Alberta are under a hectare. They're tiny little things, like it's just a bolt of lightning hits a tree, right? Lights up that tree and it goes out, because what comes with lightning? Rain. So it just puts itself out, right? That's 95% of them, something like that, right? Or it might hit the tree, it goes through the grass a little bit and kind of peters out or whatever. It doesn't have the ladder fuel. And the ladder fuel we talked about in previous podcasts is just
it's a fuels, those ground fuels that allow fire to travel from the ground up into the canopy. So you get on a spruce tree, you get those low hanging branches. You get out into the forest there, they're touching the ground. Especially with black spruce. That's a great example of a tree that's
super low. Like sometimes you even have
volatile
black spruce.
Fuel.
Super volatile, right? You know how sometimes that you have the black spruce branches, they grow down into the peat moss and then into moss, and then they pop back up on the other side and it'll actually become a new tree with new roots. With that kind of ladder fuel, like I was talking about, because it's literally the fire is using it like a ladder to get up to the top of the trees where it can fly. And it creates a situation where black spruce bogs are super volatile when it comes to fire. It's wild. Talking about that kind of, I guess, the management scale and kind of where we kind of went wrong in the past. In the past, we started in the 50s or 60s or whatever it was. we started suppressing fires at a massive scale. So we started using water bombers, and we started using firefighters, and we started really.
We actually had those resources.
We had the resources
to use,
available to do it, right? And so we would get out there, and every fire that happened, if we get to it, we put it out right away, right? We get out there with helicopters and bucket on it, and you see those big tankers dropping water and dropping retardant on it and trying to put it out right away. And we're like, yeah, we did it. Awesome work. Good work, guys. And then we're kind of starting to realize that because we did that, a lot of those low intensity fires that were supposed to happen that would maybe burn through the grass and the shrub and kind of maybe leave a couple scars on the trees but not really kill the trees. They just kind of kill the understory, and the forest is still there, and allow for some new growth to come up, maybe allowing for new habitat to be created. Those aren't happening as much, or they're happening just as much, but instead of that, now we've got these super old growth forests that are they're super volatile because they have all these ladder fuels, all this vertical structure that allows it to climb. And because there's so much of it, and there's not a lot of young stuff that's suppressant to fire because it's just young and full of water, and there's not a lot of dead stuff in it. There's not a lot of fine fuels for it to start. Those things are kind of gone now. So we're left with this. Instead of having low intensity fires burning through the understory, we've got these massive fires that are just taking over, right? And it's not that to say that what they did was wrong in the past, but maybe we could have, now knowing what we know now, we could have done it a little bit differently because we kind of went at it a little bit too much, and we're trying to fix that problem. But I mean, there's other things involved in that too, with seeing the big, campaign fires that we're seeing in BC. Mm-hmm. Like BC just had, I read today, they had the biggest fire in BC's history, recorded history. It was almost 500,000, it was almost 5,000 square kilometers.
Wow.
Which is huge for British Columbia. It's huge for Alberta too. It's huge for everywhere, right? It's a massive, crazy fire. They've had the most fires, I think, on record as well, I think. So they've got lots of crazy stuff going on.
It's a dry year for that. It's the wildfires there. They start going, and they're cooking after a while because of all the pine beetle.
Yeah. And
there's just not enough moisture. There's no rain to give these firefighters a chance to get at it.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So pine beetle good example for in British Columbia, right? So pine beetle, why would pine beetle, maybe you can explain kind of why pine beetle would be such a problem for forest fires.
Yeah. So having one of the biggest factors in wildfire spread is spotting. If you haven't heard of spotting before, it's when you get these embers caught in this updraft of the fire and travel kilometers ahead of the fire. They land on some dry tinder and some leaves, and they can start a fire ahead of it. So that's how these large scale fires can travel large distances in a short matter of time.
Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily mean that if a big fire hits a highway where you've got a 30-meter stretch of, there's no vegetation, we stop the fire, yay. It's no, not really, because that stuff is getting blown over the highway and starting at a rate that firefighters can't keep up with, possibly.
Yeah.
Right?
So with mountain pine beetle, you're getting all these pine trees on a mass scale dying. So you get all the boles of the trees are still standing.
So the trunks, yeah.
Yeah, the trunks of the trees are still standing.
Yeah.
And which offers perfect amount of drying and curing of the fuel.
Yeah.
And then you get this big fire to come through, so all that fuel is burnt up at a faster pace than if it was green.
Yeah.
As well as the bark on the sides of it is a lot more looser.
Yeah.
So when you get that big updraft, you can get these massive chunks of bark, and I'm holding up size of my head, I guess, or 2 sizes of my head, and they can travel 10 to 15 kilometers.
Yeah.
That's
it's
way
nuts.
more than what we saw in the past.
Yeah, it's crazy how far they can travel. And yeah, like you're saying, so just imagine you cut down a tree that's a green tree, it's alive, and you try to put it, so it's like trying to put leaves on a fire. You ever put leaves on a fire and it just kind of sits there and smokes, and maybe after 5 or 10 minutes it'll catch fire, right? That's kind of what you're dealing with in a live stand. Whereas if you were to take all these little twigs that are dried up and broken, and you can break them with your hands, no problem. You throw those on the fire, that goes up like stink, right? And just explodes. It's almost like gasoline on it, right? And so that's what you're dealing with pine beetle. You're dealing with these giant stands of mature pine, which is already a pretty sappy, there's lots of fine fuels like the needles that catch fire easily. It's already it's easily caught fire. So
yeah, it's a volatile species.
It's a volatile species, and as soon as you dry it out and kill it the way it is, then it's just a whole different story, right? Like you can't stop it. There's nothing. So people look into places like Slave Lake. I remember after the fire, hearing a lot of people they're frustrated people and they've just lost their homes and they just need someone to blame and I'm not, of course, it's horrible, right? But a lot of them, they go and they go, why didn't you stop it? Like you had this, they remember the night before where it was calm, or not calm, but it was, we seen it coming. You could have stopped it then. Like, why didn't you do something? And then they don't realize that we were doing everything we could. And it was trying to stop that fire from spreading into town. But when you have 100+ km/h winds blowing at a fire that is, let's say, a half a kilometer wide, and it's licking flames across the highway, it's like a blowtorch. Like, you can't stop that. It's just like this giant blowtorch the size of a town going through the forest, right? Like, you can't, no amount of water or retard, by the time you try to drop water on it, it's evaporated before it's even hit the flame, just because it's that hot, right? Like, you try and get if you were to try, it'd be a waste of time to get a water bomber to try and lay water on an active flame front, because it wouldn't even hit the ground. It would dissipate and evaporate before it even hit the flame, right? So like, what they do is they wait until maybe nightfall or maybe a little bit of rain to knock the flames down, and that gives the helicopters and planes an opportunity to actually hit that spot and get low so that the water actually gets there. But this is a crazy topic. We're going all over the place.
Yeah, it's easy too. It's easy. You can go off on a tangent about wildfire. There's so much to talk to.
Tangents. Yeah, so many tangents. And as some people might know, Colin and I, real good at tangents.
Yeah. We're like Matt said, we've known each other for years now, and we can easily talk for hours about stuff like this. So
yeah, usually a little bit more profanity maybe involved, but
a little bit more, a little more professional, I guess, this time.
Yeah. This is going all over the world to see. We can't let them know who we really are. So yeah. Anyways, talking about the management and kind of where we went wrong in the past, kind of how we.
I wouldn't say we went wrong. We have that. You have that obligation to put the fire out for public safety.
Exactly.
But it's a cumulative effect,
Yeah, it's cumulative effect. You're right.
Now they have all that mature to over mature stands out there. Those forest stands that are historically not supposed to be there. Yeah. And if they were historically there, then they all burnt up. Yeah. And you get that ecosystem regeneration there.
Yeah. No, exactly. That's the wrong word. I shouldn't have said we went wrong. I should have just said where we were maybe a little misguided in what we were doing. And we have to protect towns, right? We have to protect people's livelihood, infrastructure, businesses, all those things have to be protected. And that's kind of what happened is as we moved into the forest, as we do, like you see all these beautiful cabins in the middle of the mountains with the pine trees and cedars next to them and kind of over top of the house and stuff. You're like, oh, look at how beautiful it is. It's so nice. And like, meanwhile, that place is going to burn anytime. You're just waiting on the right lightning strike. It's going to go up because there's no protection there. You got cedar shake house in a pine forest that's like on a slope and all these different things.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like,
I remember, I can't remember. It was one of our professors in university said, everybody likes the sound of a babbling brook, but until it's flowing through your living room, which is, it transfers on to forestry saying, everybody likes to see the trees and everything around their house until there's a fire coming through. Then you want to just get rid of them. Yeah. No, that's just it, right? It looks, people are upset about, cutting around towns or cut blocks in your highways and stuff like that because it looks ugly. Well, it looks ugly right now. In 5 years' time, you're not going to know there's a cut block there. It's going to be coming back so fast, right? But places like Slave Lake, after the fire came through, the forest companies they went through and they were creating swaths of forest that were allowing for basically fire breaks, keeping the fire away from important resources, and the public is totally fine with it. Like, yeah, that's good. Let's keep doing that because we don't want this to happen again, right? So as soon as you have informed people, then it becomes a lot easier to make the right choices as soon as the people understand why you're doing it, right? Rather than just thinking that like, oh, well, it's not as pretty as it was. And it's like, well, this is the natural succession of this forest, right? Is to do this. So, but yeah, fire, we even use it as a management tool, right? Like we're talking about prescribed burns, right? So yeah, in the springtime, especially. Yeah. So prescribed burns can be used like especially in like national parks and stuff like that. They use it a lot for burning out places that are problem areas. Cause like obviously in national parks, provincial parks, we've got a lot of tourists,
there's a lot of infrastructure there as far as like cabins and trails and people wanting to use that resource. And that's a big amount of income coming in for the country, right? We want to keep that going. We want to keep our parks looking clean and pristine and happy and healthy, right? And so they will go through, and people might be upset, like, oh, my favorite hiking trail, like they burnt it all out, like those, like what the heck were they doing? Like this is so ridiculous. Like people get pissed, right? And it's fair enough because it's like your favorite spot, and now it's been set back to a different timestamp, and you have to deal with this burnt out forest that you're walking through and getting ash all over you, right? And it happens, but that's part of. I think people need to see that that's part of the natural landscape, and it's beauty in its own way. Seeing those burnt out trees and seeing like, oh, look at this, and then you come back the next year and like, oh, look at these little like 1 or 2 inch like saplings coming up, right? It's kind of cute.
Yeah.
And then like the next year you come back and like, oh my god, it's already 1 meter tall. And then 10 years later you come back and you can't put your arm in the bush without not seeing it because it's so thick now with vegetation coming back or whatever, right? But so what they do with prescribed burns is they'll go through and do that. They'll take a non-windy day, and they'll find the right
usually
weather.
in the fall.
Usually in the fall or the springtime when they know there might be rain coming in the forecast, so they can burn something out. There's no wind, low wind, and they can comfortably have resources on hand to control where the fire spreads to, right? And they can make sure that only the piece they want burnt is burnt. Sometimes it doesn't always go that well. Sometimes like weather's unpredictable. Like, I mean, you talk to a meteorologist, right? Like I once talked to a meteorologist friend, and he said, man, I have the only job where I can be right 30% of the time and be given a pat on the back for doing a good job. It's they're predicting. They can't say, right? So how many times have you and I been on a fire where you're sitting there and you go like, okay, we got this thing down. I think we got it taken care of because you're putting out the head of the fire type thing. And all of a sudden the wind shifts 180 degrees and the head is now 300 meters away on the other side. And by the time you get there, it's already roaring again, right? Like that stuff happens, and it's unpredictable. But
you're literally playing with fire.
Yeah, literally playing with fire.
Yeah.
And the climate too, right? You're dealing with weather and all kinds of different things that you can't control, but they do their best at trying to make sure that they do that at the right time, in the right spot, in the right situations. And sometimes they'll hold off prescribed fires for like 3, 4, 5 years. I don't know. They hold off for a long time. I've heard of situations where they hold them off for years because the right opportunity did not present itself, right? And then finally, when they got to do it, people are pissed because it's in sight of a town, and they don't like looking at this big burnt out hill slope or whatever, right?
Yeah, especially in Jasper, I know they'll burn off the whole side of a mountain.
Yeah,
just a period of a couple days, to reset, because they still fight fire in the parks. Yep. They do have fire crews.
Well, they have to.
Yeah,
they have to, because like I said, that it's such a high valued resource that like everybody wants to go to and go hiking and go see elk and sheep and grizzly bears and all these things, and even just see the lakes and fish for trout and see birds that they don't get to see, and cougars and goats and all this stuff. And if you let it all burn, then yeah, you got a problem. But so obviously they do suppression within the parks, but yeah, they just trying to let people know that fire is not unnatural, and when you see it, don't be upset about it, especially with prescribed burn. These people are trying to do this in your best interest. And I wonder actually how many times you get a prescribed burn goes through and burns out an area appropriately, right? And the following year, in the next 5 years, you have a big crazy fire that comes up and just stops right at that spot because of that prescribed burn, right? I wonder how many times that's happened and gone undocumented and unknown by the public, because the media is not going to say, hey, they saved us with that fire they did 5 years ago. That's not a good story. Nobody's going to read that. Like, it's like telling the story about destruction and chaos and people been removed from their homes and stuff, so that you don't hear that stuff. All you see on the news is the bad and the bad press, and you don't get any of the good stuff that fire brings you. Yeah.
I know for prescribed burns you were talking about it burning up and stopping, right? And that's what you do around communities too, especially around that, like river valleys and around matted grass. It will burn out the river valley.
Yeah, we used to
in
do
the
a lot of that,
springtime,
right?
And there's still a little bit of snow on the ground, or it's just gotten off, and it's still cool out, and it'll be able to snuff itself out in the night.
Yeah.
But yeah, we used to do that every spring, and just burn off the ditches, burn off river beds and valleys and stuff. Yeah, it's fun.
It's the best.
Unfortunately, I never got to be any of the igniters on the...
Oh, no? You never got to use a drip torch or anything?
I got to use one, but I never got to do it in the springtime.
Yeah. You get those, just timing.
Yeah.
You just weren't there. Yeah. I got the opportunity to do it quite a few times. I remember one time we were burning some grass close to Slave Lake. Actually, I think it was pre 2011, pre the big fire that burnt through. But we were burning through some grass and some kind of young vegetation, really like right up against people's houses, literally up against their fences, and super highly volatile. Like you just got grass on top of grass on top of cured grass on top of cured grass on top of, then you got dead willow on top of it, and you've got like all this stuff that's like if some kid rode by and flicked a match into this, like these houses would go up, right? So like that kind of stuff. So anyways, we were in there doing that. I remember it was my first time. I think it was my first year, and or no, it was my second year in Helitack, and first time doing prescribed burns. And I was walking around with this drip torch, which is basically just like a canister filled with diesel and gasoline, a mixture of it, with an end that allows just drops, kind of slow drops to come out. So it's not pouring out; it's just drops come out, so it's more controlled. And you can just tip it up, and it'll stop flowing, right? And you just light that on fire and you just walk. And you know this, I'm just talking to the people.
Oh, no, go for it.
And anyways, I remember doing that, and it was taking a while, and there was no one around. It was a really controlled situation. We had so many people, or not, I don't want around, I mean no public. We had so many firefighters around, and we had people with side-by-sides that had water, and everyone had a Wajax bag on, which is just a big, I don't know, what do you call it? Just a
big rubber bag.
Full of water.
Bag,
it's the best water gun ever. Is what it is. It's the greatest water gun
pump.
ever. Yeah, it's got a hand pump, and it shoots water like
Super
crazy.
soakers have nothing on these things.
Yeah, they're awesome. Actually, my dad used to use them to take us out as kids. They hurt. They're not pleasant when you're like 7 years old. You get blasted in the face with a Wajax bag.
Yeah.
Thanks, Terry. Appreciate it.
Character building.
Yeah, character building. Yeah. But anyways, we're doing this fire, and my coordinator, actually, he grabbed me and he's like, hey, like this isn't going fast enough. Just like jump on the side by side and like just like go that way. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like use the drip torch, get on the side by side, and just drive that way. And I was like, really? So I was on the side by side, driving the side by side, just kind of dripping fire out on the side of me, right? And it's burning out all this grass, and I'm just having the time of my life, because I was like, this is awesome, and it's all super controlled, and nothing was going to go wrong. We had so many people around, but like seeing all that matted grass go up and how high some of those flames were just from that drip torch that I put down was insane. You have 7 or 8 foot flames temporarily, because it's only grass, so it's going to burn out in a second, right? It's not going to take long. It's going to burn out in, I don't even know. Like I think it took us, after I lit it, it was like maybe 15 minutes to burn this like giant, like it was like, I think it was like 3 hectares worth of area, or maybe not that big. Maybe it was only a hectare, but yeah, about a hectare worth of area in really short period of time.
Yeah, there's a lot of energy in that stuff.
And once it's gone, it's just the soil left, right? But I remember doing that and thinking, man, this is wild. And at the time, I didn't have any real fire experience, and I was watching these 8-foot flames climb towards these aspen trees, right? And in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, like I know this is supposed to stop, but like I don't know if it's gonna. Like I think we better get over there and like take care of this. And it literally just like it hit that spot and just stopped, just died immediately right where the trees were. I was like, this is amazing. Like we didn't even have to try and go put it out. We did. We went through and made sure, you test it with your hands, make sure that everything's out, so there's no opportunity for it to come up again. But this grassed area, it burnt through so fast, and it hit the trees and just died, because we were paying attention to all the indices. We were paying attention to all the fire indicators and the weather, and we knew what was going to happen. We knew that specific spot was not going to burn for multiple reasons. But yeah. It's crazy. Those prescribed burns are super important, and from that area, after that, like it wouldn't need to be burned for another maybe 5 or 10 years, because it's now it's new growth. There's not as much cured grass. It's not as much of a risk, right? So those people's homes are not as high of a risk because of that prescribed burn.
I know when I was in Lac La Biche, we would do the same year.
Oh, everyone does
every
right?
year, once a year in the springtime.
Oh, you guys do the same one every time, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know along the the train rails and stuff like that.
Yeah, where you get a lot of man-made. It's easy to, or not easy, but you're able to see where the trends are and fire starts, and where it's more likely for a man-made fire to occur.
Totally, yeah.
Some ignition, and then
it's easy to
go out there, do a prescribed burn, or do some other mitigation such as fire smarting. Yeah, in those areas.
Yeah, so. Fire smarting, all that kind of stuff, and it's. Yeah, and they'll do it every year because it's easy and it's quick and it doesn't require a whole lot of resources to do it under the right conditions, right? So yeah, you brought up fire smarting. Actually, let's talk about that. Fire smarting. Yeah. So you were just doing that stuff today, actually. So you're kind of going over some coordination. So
Yeah, just basically for people that don't know, Fire Smart is a way of mitigating wildfire on our landscape here, especially with respect to communities and towns and human values. It's not just a one type of treatment that'll fall under Fire Smart. There's actually 7 disciplines. So there's vegetation fuel management, there's public education, there's planning, there's legislation, there's cross training, you have interagency cooperation, and development is the 7th one.
Dropping knowledge.
And so through a 7-fingered approach, you can mitigate wildfire to a community, and that's what I'm working with right now.
Right. So so we can go through even just. I think I'm gonna have a whole other podcast with. I have a few people that want to talk about Fire Smart because it's a big one, right? And it's a public service that people want to know about. But generally speaking, Fire Smarting, you're just eliminating fuels, opportunity for fire to take over, essentially, right? So that's the big one. That's the one that's as far as the application of it, that's
what you're doing is you're spacing trees out for vegetation management. You're removing those ladder fuels, and you're making it you're ensuring that a ground fire that passes through there doesn't make its way up into the canopy and start a crown fire. So you're able to directly attack a ground fire with hand crews and and
so that's
it keeps that intensity down. So you're not dealing with a worst case scenario. You're dealing with something a lot more manageable. And you can easily access that as well. Yeah,
exactly. So just eliminating those opportunities for fire to become more intense and take out a community or something. And like the public information side of it is kind of informing people that how to make your yard and your home more fire smart, right? So not having wood siding and cedar shake and not having, a bunch of wood chips on your deck or like stuff like that, right? Like it's
making sure you're not stacking all your firewood for the winter, like it's all stacked against the house, and you have uncovered decks, and you have grass growing underneath your deck, and
all that stuff.
Yeah, like you said, that old cedar shakes with vinyl siding.
So like for Fire Smart, if you ultimately you'd want to have, the best would be like a tin roof with like stucco siding, which is just rock.
No windows.
No windows. No opportunity for it to come through. And like no trees within like a X number of meters of your house.
30 meters or 10 to 30 meters. Yeah.
It's wild. I got so many trees within 30 meters of my house.
Yeah,
I live in the city.
Yeah. We don't have to really worry about a wildfire in the city. Actually, we do. I remember in the River Valley last summer.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
In 2016, there was about
actually
2 or 3 wildfires that happened. They were small and manageable, but
I was biking that day. I remember I was like, that's a wildfire, and my friends didn't believe me. They're like, no, it's not. It's just like, some homeless guys having a cookout or something. It was like, no, that's definitely like somebody started that. It wasn't lightning. It was in a bunch of willow and river alder and stuff like that. So it was kids, or it was somebody, like it was human started, but it was like a fire that was burning through the river valley. Yeah, it was small. They nailed it pretty quick, I think, with a structural firefighter crew. But still they happen. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Even in places like say Lethbridge, they have a plan to deal with like grassland fires and stuff. Like you were mentioning, these big grass fires can just take off and run. It's hard to, like you were saying, that 7 to 8 foot flame length. Yeah, that's hard to deal with directly. You can't just drop a tanker on that or attack it directly. You've seen how many times wind can shift and then people get caught, and it's all about fighting it safely. Number one. Yeah, totally. Making sure you're not putting your own safety at risk to put out a wildfire.
Yeah, exactly. There's nobody standing in front of a wildfire with a super soaker trying to put it out. It's just not. Like, when you see these giant campaign fires like in BC and maybe the Richardson fire in northern Alberta or the giant fire that took out Fort McMurray.
People forget about that. Yeah. That Richardson fire that happened in 2011.
2000. Yeah, it was 2011. Yeah.
And that was over 900,000 hectares. Yeah. And that was just north of Fort McMurray. It shut down the oil sands. It shut down the town. Yeah. It didn't evacuate the town, but then you come,
they were on alert
2016.
Though, yeah, 2016.
And then you have another fire there as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild actually to think about. Like all that stuff. It's yeah, it's it's hard to explain to people that these things. I kind of forgot my train of thought where I was going with that, but what I was talking about.
Cut it out.
Yeah, I don't know, whatever. We'll carry on. I'm not going to edit this stuff.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, so we talked about, what do we get? I'm just looking through my list here, things we want to get through. Fire Smart, why they get so big, right? So, the other thing, yeah, why they get so big. So we were talking about kind of the buildup of fuel from suppression of fire, right? Over the years, but also it's kind of the perfect storm because we're looking at like the climate situation now where, I mean, Alberta alone, we haven't had real tornadoes around. Like we've had tornadoes every year, I guess, but like very small, and you don't really even hear about them. This year, I think we've had like 4 or 5 tornadoes already this year. Crazy hailstorms, all these crazy fires. Everything's like, the climate is ripe for these chaotic events, right? Like we're hearing, everything is just getting warm enough. It's creating the perfect circumstances for, it's basically the perfect storm. You got to build up a fuel, and you got the climate that's getting more chaotic and more sporadic and less predictable, making it hard to manage. So it's, I mean, till 2011, Slave Lake burnt down. 2016, Fort McMurray burnt down. 2017, BC is like aflame, like everything.
Yeah.
So
the reason you're not hearing about that is because there's so many these small towns being evacuated. You don't get that massive evacuation. It's just it's controlled evacuations, but it's still like hundreds of these towns are being put on alert.
It's bananas. Like it's nuts how much of this is happening now, right? Like it almost seems surreal that like maybe it's just like coincidental that we're having all these crazy, community burning towns or community burning fires happening right now, but it's not. It has to do with,
it affects
climate change. It's a big one. Like it creates the perfect situation to allow just that extra half a degree or average half a degree or whatever it is. And it just changes the climate enough where you have more winds. Winds is the biggest thing for fire spread. Wind.
Yeah. Where we really see it is in the springtime. I get asked all the time as people saying, "Oh, like how come there's not a lot of snow this year? I guess we're going to have a lot of fire this year." But it's the earlier the spring, the more time you have between when the snow is off the landscape and green up occurs.
Right.
The longer that window is open,
the
more chance you get these massive fires. So I can't remember what the percentage was.
Right.
But most of the massive fires that result in all these insurance claims and all the massive damage occur in the springtime, like early to mid-May.
Yeah.
Like that was Fort McMurray, that was Slave Lake, and you're getting these winds that are coming across here and just evaporating all the snow, and you're not getting that early spring.
Yeah.
I remember when Fort McMurray burned down, I was in the bush, I think 2 weeks before that, and you can just feel the vegetation under your feet just crumbling like potato chips, and it had that eerie feeling like something's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, but you don't want to drive through with a quad at that point with a hot muffler, and just, it happens, right? Like people, they joke about that. They joke about ATVs, maybe like, "Oh yeah, like I'm going quadding in the in the bush. I hope I don't start a forest fire." Ha ha ha! It's like, no, that's for real. That happens.
Yeah. Like BC, I think Alberta just had an ATV ban on public lands.
Yeah. No, it needs to happen sometimes because if you get those hot weathers, which like this summer in Alberta we have. It's been hot. It's been like above 27 degrees Celsius, above 26 degrees Celsius, like often.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. It doesn't usually happen. It happens, but not this often. It seems like today, I think it's 27.
Yeah, in August.
Yeah, it's August, end of August. Whereas yesterday it was 14 degrees, I think. It's weird how sporadic it is. But yeah, the hot weather means a lot of easy drying, right? And the winds. The winds are the scary one. If you have hot weather and you don't have any winds, a fire starts and it kind of meanders and kind of gets this weird shape. It doesn't really head in any specific direction. It just kind of spreads, right? And it's not really as big of a concern because it's not moving as quick. The rate of spread is slow. So it starts up, and say we get to it and it's 2 hectares big. By the time you get bombers on and stuff, it's pretty much contained a lot of times if there's no wind. Whereas if you have wind, like you can get fires moving at like 30 meters a minute, just flying in one direction. And it's like a blowtorch going through the bush, and it's uncontrollable, right? If you got that wind, it's just the preheating of fuel ahead of it, combined with the angle of the flame aiming towards it and licking those fuels, and the spotting, like you're saying, you can spot like 15 kilometers ahead, and it gets out of hand so fast. So like wind is obviously, that it's a huge problem. I remember one time doing hack, actually, we got dropped off, and we got dropped off on a big fire around 4 p.m., which is like pretty common time for it to happen, kind of the heat of the day, or just after the heat of the day, when
peak burning time,
right? And it's just basically
so your fuels dry out. It's the lowest relative humidity of the day.
Winds tend to
pick up a little bit.
Yeah. And anyway, so we landed on this fire. It was pretty big already. We were kind of taking care of it. We were kind of the only crew, and then we get a couple other crews coming in. Some bombers get on it, and we got dispatched to another fire, a spot fire from that big one. And so we jumped in the helicopter. As soon as we jumped in the helicopter, we heard people going crazy on the ground, telling everybody to get up in the air because the winds had shifted. And what we were fighting, which was the back of the fire, was now turning into the head of the fire, which is like crazy. That's how people die. And it's because
that's why there's procedures and protocol on how to approach a fire, how to start attacking a fire.
Exactly. And that's why we started at the back, right? But sometimes you have that situation where we had the wind shifted 180 degrees exactly, and we were up in the air already. Nobody got hurt. It was taken care of. It was managed exactly right. It was done perfectly to get everybody out of there, and then to start attacking the different side and to do it carefully. And everything that firefighters do is safety first, right? It's always safety first. But anyways, so we get up in the air and we go to the spot fire within spitting distance of the other one, and we get down, we put it out. It was quick. It took us like I think 20 minutes to put it out, just like a little 6-foot square area, right? Nothing didn't get out of hand yet. Wasn't into the ladder fuels. And then before we even finished that one, we got called to another one. We got called to 9 fires that day, all spot fires from that fire. One of them was, I don't even remember how far it was. It was tens of kilometers away. Like, it was a long ways. And yeah, these things, they just, the wind shifting, like it didn't create a bunch of spot fires in one line on the landscape. We had a big circle of spot fires from this one, and like long distances away from each one of it, because it was, the wind just kept changing. Right?
And when it gets bigger and it starts making its own weather. Through that updraft and air currents.
No, it's wild. So fires can create their own weather, essentially.
Yeah.
If they get big enough, right? They call them saying the updrafts. They can kind of create their own.
They could create wind. They're sucking air
storms.
In.
They create storms even. Yeah.
Yeah, lightning above that again.
Because so much moisture going up in the air, and you get all the smoke, and you get it's so much heat rising so quickly. It causes some interesting weather. Anyways, it's wild. It's wild to watch it, actually. But so I guess we didn't really talk about, kind of jumped ahead of how these things start. We didn't really talk about that at all.
Yeah. People find it's a little interesting to know that about 50% of fires are actually human caused.
Is that much, eh? I didn't even know.
Yeah, it's about 50-50.
It's wild.
So either with 50% being natural cause, mostly lightning, or holdover fires that will stay underground for a while and then light up when the time's right. Yeah,
we talked about that a couple podcasts ago, I think. We were just talking about how the holdover fires, basically, say a lightning hits a tree, the fire kind of goes into the roots, and it doesn't require oxygen because there's no open flame. It's kind of just smoldering, and it can creep under there until the conditions are right, that there's enough wind and enough heat that things are dried up enough that it can breach the surface and then turn into a forest fire, right? So that kind of stuff. So things like so people, right? So you're saying 50% is people, right? So you got ATVs, hot mufflers, and stuff like that. On
spark
quads.
arresters aren't cleaned off and get that big chunk of, well, not big a chunk, but a big enough chunk to hold the heat and start a grass fire.
Yeah, cigarettes. Right?
Cigarette butts are a big one. I remember there was a fire at my grandparents' place when I was small.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And it was a guy threw a cigarette out the window and went and burned up the grass and caught the hay bales on fire and took out a whole windrow.
Hay bales.
Yeah.
Man. Yeah. Okay, let's watch that burn for like 20 minutes.
Yeah. You kind of just let that go, but it's...
I've seen it happen on the highway too, actually, heading between Edmonton and Calgary. I remember driving one day and I was like, that's an uncontrolled grass fire right there. I didn't have anything to do in this highway too, so it's pretty busy. I had nothing, no way to stop, so I was going to stop and try patting it out, but I just called the municipality and they took care of it right away. It didn't turn into anything. But yeah, I almost guarantee that was the cigarettes. Or, there's always the old people driving their cars with the the missing axle on their trailer, dragging their whole trailer on on the highway. I don't know if you guys heard about that, but I was telling that I think in the second episode or something, talking about the just shooting just faulty vehicle parts, right? You could even have a muffler dragging on the ground or on the highway.
A spark or anything.
Any kind of spark causes problems, right? So any kind of heat source causes problems. Another one, so people camping, right? So people camping in what do you call it?
Random camping.
Yeah.
They don't put their fire out. They don't soak again.
Yeah. So honestly, like people, so they say soak it, stir it, soak it again, right? And then you see all these black embers, and you're like, oh yeah, there's no smoke, we're good. But nobody like stirs it up to see what's going on underneath, because it's easy for that stuff to sit like a holdover forever, right? I remember there's a situation where a guy, his quad broke down. He stopped in a cup block, and he put a warming fire into a burn pile in a cup block, right? Thinking like, okay, that's a safe place to put it. He thinks he's doing the right thing, doing it in the burn pile, right? Which would make sense. The problem is you've got all this charcoal that was created from the burn pile that was burnt in the wintertime, so it can't go anywhere. It doesn't hold over. It's not the right conditions for it. And he reheated it to the point where it was easy for it to keep going, for it to take off. And he left, and I think it was the next day it started a forest fire, right? And it's these kind of things happen. It's people don't really think about it. There's a misconception with fire that like if you can't see the smoke or you can't see the flame, like it's good to go. But like all it takes is one wind to blow one ember outside of the fire pit or outside of the fire ring or wherever, and then you got a grass fire, and then you got a forest fire, and then you got communities burning. And we were talking about access in one of the podcasts too. We were talking about how people get upset that they're restricting access in an area, and they get all mad because like, well, I want to go quadding this weekend, or I want to go camping this weekend. It's like, well, you're not allowed to protect the forest for future generations and to protect communities and like everything, right? There's so much to be protected. So you have to take that into consideration when you're planning your camping, and check the fire hazard, make sure you know what to do. Yeah.
Public education's huge, and that's one of the big hurdles we have to get over with wildfire management, is making sure everyone's aware of why these things are starting and how you can mitigate this, like how you can protect your property, how you can take an active role, not just a fire department or a municipality taking on that role of a fire manager, but for you to be aware that your actions have consequences. Yep,
for sure. And people, they kind of neglect that responsibility, right? They don't realize that they're responsible for those actions. And you can be criminally responsible for starting a forest fire that burns through some timber, or burns through a home or a well site or something. You can be held criminally responsible if you're found negligent. So you want to make sure that anything you do in the landscape, you make sure that possibility doesn't present itself.
Yeah, and that's why there's that Forest and Prairie Protection Act.
Yep.
They have anyone working in the bush with industry has to have a minimum amount of firefighting equipment or fire suppression equipment with them.
Yeah. Yeah, to make sure that if they do come across something, they can take care of it, or at least
if their heavy machinery is causing a fire and stuff like that.
Yeah. There's all kinds of regulations around it. Definitely. That covers a lot of it, I guess. But I guess we can talk about more fun stuff. Talk about the hell attack. Good stuff. The funnest job for a young single person with no responsibilities.
Young single person with no responsibilities, indeed. It was a great job. It was awesome to do it in the summertime between school, and you'd make enough money to not starve during the school year and
pay for your beer. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
My beer too.
Yeah, but no, I still know people who are working in fire, and it's just, I mean, my hat's off to them. They're busting their ass out.
There's a lot of jobs in it, for sure. Yeah, you can start off in hell attack. You can become a leader. Then you can become a coordinator. You can become a ranger. You can become there's a million different jobs.
You can do a
specialist,
lookouts.
Lookout. Yeah, working in the fire lookouts. Like what's that guy from the Red Green Show? That's definitely a Canadian reference.
Yeah,
Red Green Show. The ranger that's all alone up in the tower, watching. He's all a little bit loopy, but it's an awesome job. I definitely advise anybody that wants to go and look into, if you want to fly in a helicopter and put out forest fires, it's pretty sweet.
It's kind of, I definitely take flying in a helicopter for granted now.
Yeah.
Right? You took it for granted. And
totally took it for granted. Like
yeah.
it was awesome at first, and then you kind of get used to it. It just becomes it becomes like driving in your car after a while because you're doing it every day, right? You're just like, oh, I'm in a helicopter again. Awesome. But it's like, you kind of take it for granted, and then when you haven't done it in a while, you're like, man, I wish I could do that again. That was awesome.
Yeah.
It's a good time, and it's such an awesome job. Everyone in it is so much fun. Like it's just it's a lot of hurry up and wait, right? Like we always talk about. So you're on the job and you're on a 5-minute getaway, which means that you have to be in the helicopter and in the air within 5 minutes of getting the call. So you end up spending a lot of times like structural firefighters do, just sitting around, right, doing whatever, because you can't get into anything because you have to be available to get into the means of transportation within a certain X number of minutes, right? So you can't get into doing any kind of crazy activity. You kind of have to stick to mowing the grass and cleaning dishes or whatever, right? Like you got to be ready to go. But during that time, you get like it's just so much fun. You get a lot of camaraderie, right? It's an awesome job.
Yeah, you get to know everybody really well. Like I still talk to people. I mean, you worked in Slave Lake. I was in Lac La Biche there. And you see each other in the summer times on exports and
no, it was awesome. Yeah, that's the other thing. You get to go exports. You get to go. So if there's not busy in your district, you get to go. You might get sent out to the Yukon or the States or BC or wherever. So you get to kind of see some of the country
and how sweet. They fight fire in different provinces, like in Alberta, where we have the money, we have the means to have like crews sitting there at 5-minute getaway to be able to pay them.
Yeah.
And for all these resources to put a fire out immediately. So you have these loaded patrols where you get these guys going out into evenly spaced out into the district, into high hazard areas.
Yeah.
And a loaded patrol is when you load your helicopter full of gear and you're ready to go as if you were on a fire or going to a fire, but you just fly around, and it's usually around areas that are high hazard. On the maps, they can calculate what areas are high hazard, or they have locations of lightning strikes within the last few days, and you go fly over that, see if there's any smoke in the area. Yeah. Or around campgrounds along
so a lot of
long
flying
weekends
around the
and stuff. So you do a lot of flying around.
Chasing storms, watching lightning strikes.
Yeah.
Betting on which cloud is going to turn into a storm.
Yeah.
Sitting around on Man Up going like, I think that one. That's my horse right there. That one's going to start some, because they happen all the time, right? You get kind of bored laying around, but it's once you get started, that job is the best job. You get to run chainsaw, you get to watch helicopters bucket, you get to watch tankers come in and kind of watch them do their thing. Like that's fascinating to watch the precision there, right? You're flying this.
It's a free air show.
It's ridiculous. It's insane.
Those guys are probably one of the hardest working guys in the province there, because they're based out of one district and they can get called across the province on a moment's notice. Yeah,
it's wild. It's such a cool experience to watch that stuff. Right? If you're sitting on the ground and you get to see like a retardant drop, right? It's so weird watching this red kind of foam stuff land. It just looks so alien, and so it's so cool to watch. It's such an adrenaline rush. Yeah, no, it's awesome. I remember my first fire ever. Actually, my first one I did a dozer boss on, which was I helped the guy pull or not pull, but we ribboned out an area around the edge of the fire in the middle of the night when the fire's down. There's no flame, so that bulldozers essentially can come through behind us and kind of follow the edge of the fire, so that in the morning when the fire kicks up again, it has no place to go. That was my first one. But what I meant to say was my second one, as officially as a Helitac guy. First one, I was actually working for West Fraser at the time, but second one, we landed on this fire on a road, and there was 2 helicopters, and everyone was like just spread out doing stuff. And I had so much training, and like I behind my back of my head, I knew what to do. But when we landed, I was like, what do I do? What do I do? Like, where do I go? I'm looking every way. I'm looking for someone to tell me what to do, where everyone's just spreading and doing what they do because they're so good at it. And it's just second nature that if someone's not doing something, you do that thing or whatever, right? Or try to support other people. But it was kind of funny how much adrenaline was in me, and I couldn't sort it out because it was so exciting. And then it only took about another couple fires, and I was like, okay, now I know what my role is and kind of what I'm doing. But it was crazy to experience that the first time. It's something that I think everyone should try once or twice. Yeah, it's pretty sweet. Yeah.
I remember one of my first fires. Call one tree wonder, and that's when it gets lightning hits the tree and starts burning a little bit, and
which is like the majority of your
putting
fires.
It out, and we were rushing, like it was like a house was on fire and stuff like that. So we're out there filling water, panicking, and our leader's yelling at us, telling us to get going. And of course, in the back of his mind, he's laughing because he knows it's under control. And the fire got up to this one tree.
Save
and it
the
candled.
squirrel's house.
Yeah, this tree candled, and we looked up and we could see this tree just torching in the middle of the forest. And he's like, "Come on, guys, let's go." And we're running, tripping over stuff, and we finally got it out.
You weren't running, were you? Not supposed to be running,
we weren't running.
But, can't run with chainsaws, Colin. That's irresponsible.
Yeah. But yeah, like it's
walking briskly.
It's the biggest challenge with wildfire is just being able to slow your mind down.
Yeah.
And, like take it all in and just see like, okay, like I can only do so much right now.
Yeah. It's managing it's like any high
one step at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any crisis situation, right? Like any time you've been in a situation where there's something unexpected that happens that's, you know, in air quotes catastrophic, or in your mind catastrophic, right? And the way that you deal with that. And I think like Hell Attack gets you really good at managing those emotions and like understanding that adrenaline level and kind of maybe even that shock, temporary shock, right? So yeah, it's crazy to think about. Like it's so much fun. Definitely do it.
Yeah.
Anybody that wants to go out there and apply for it's with the government. So yeah, you can go on the government website, look up Hell Attack or Hack, or just Google it. You'll find it.
I think I usually close their applications on November 30th.
November 30th, yeah.
And start doing interviews for the springtime.
Yeah. It's a pretty lengthy process, and it's pretty like there's a physical, and there's all kinds of stuff going on. But definitely if you can get in, do it. It's awesome. So much fun. But yeah. Anyways, so yeah, that's pretty much I think what we want to do. That's almost an hour, crushing it.
Yeah,
look at this, just off the cuff, nothing planned, just kind of sit down and.
That's good. I mean, it's easy to flow. I mean, I don't know what else do you want to talk about.
I don't know, man. I think that's pretty much good. Yeah. It's not as much laughter in this one as we usually have in our conversations, but I guess I just started this one and just jumped right into it. I'm like, hey, so this is Colin. So fire.
Hey, so doom and gloom.
Yeah, should have been like, hey, this is Colin. A little bit of laughs, but
yeah.
Sorry, people. I'll have him on again sometime next time he wants to talk about something.
Yeah, like you said, there's so many different topics in wildfire. Like,
I mean, just in forestry and environment and everything in general, right? Like there's so much going on. It's wild. Like every day I have people come, you should do one on this. You should do one on this. And I'm like, man, nobody even listens to this yet. Just relax.
Yeah.
Get a listenership before we start pumping out a million different ideas. But I do have a giant list of stuff that I want to do. Yeah, and it's like I'm pumped. I'm excited for this thing to get out there. Yeah, it's gonna be good, man.
Yeah, no, it's good. Thanks for having me. I mean,
cool.
It's awesome to.
Thanks for coming on, man. We'll have you on again. Let's go get a beer or something.
Yeah, I could do that.
Take this to the next level.
Yeah.
Anyways, so thanks for listening. This has been the Your Forest podcast with me, Matthew Christoph, and my buddy Colin Paranich, good friend. Anyways, so if you guys have any questions or anything like that. You can get a hold of me at yourforestpodcast@gmail.com. Yeah. That's it. See you guys.
That's all she wrote.